Proverbs 29. So here we go, Proverbs 29. We are going to go to John chapter 18 and 19 here in a moment. And I told you a couple weeks ago that I wanted to spend some time talking about Pontius Pilate, because he's very prominent in the crucifixion of Jesus. I mean, in some ways, he's kind of the linchpin in the whole trial of Jesus, the mock trial, and all of that. And as I started studying this and just trying to put some focus on Pontius Pilate himself, I was actually kind of surprised how my study went. Okay, because the Bible study process that I encourage you guys to utilize. That's something that I utilize in preparing sermons. Okay, and just like any preacher does. As I'm writing down just notes about Pontius Pilate, as I'm asking questions about him and about the scenario, and actually it just went a different direction even than what I was expecting. And so actually I want us to talk about Pontius Pilate, but I want us to kind of put it through the lens of this verse in Proverbs chapter 29. So Proverbs 29, and then look down at verse 25. It says, "The fear of man brings a snare." Anybody know what a snare is? Yes? It's a trap. Think like an animal trap. "The fear of man brings a snare, but whoso puts his trust in the Lord shall be safe." This is the verse I want us to have in mind as we talk about Pontius Pilate tonight. So here we go. Let's turn to John chapter 18. That's where we'll start. Okay, so move there quickly. John chapter 18, and we'll be mainly in chapters 18, and then a little bit into chapter 19 as well. And chapter 28 is where they bring Jesus to the hall of judgment, to Pilate's hall. Like I said, Pilate is a central figure here. And everything that's happening to Jesus, I know Pastor he kind of went through Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as he was going through the book of Mark. And so we've been over some of this recently, which I won't go into tons and tons of details. But I think it's safe to say that the trial of Jesus is probably one of the most egregious acts of injustice in all of history. And Pilate sees that, and he knows that. He realizes everything that's going on. Pilate he's the ultimate authority in all this, and he knows it, and the Jewish people know it. But he allows the Jewish people, who are essentially his subjects, they're the conquered people, he allows them to have control, and I want to look at why. And as we dive into this, Pilate, he's a prime illustration of how the fear of man brings a snare or a trap. Everybody paying attention? All right. So here we go. Here's a couple where I want us to start off. Let's start off with some observations here. I want to just talk about what Pilate is assessing about the situation that's brought to him. Okay, so the first thing here that we'll look at is just Pilate's assessments or observations. Okay, now if you remember, and actually they say it in verse 31, the Jewish leaders, they bring Jesus to Pilate because in verse 31, the second half of the verse, the Jews said to Pilate, they said, "It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." Okay, since Rome was in control, Rome had told the Jewish people, hey, you're not in charge of executions anymore. If you have a legal problem with someone and you think that they need to be put to death, you bring them to Roman authority. Only Rome has the authority to put someone to death. So you think about the Jews have had their mock trials with both in the house of Annas and then with Caiaphas in the temple. That was all, for show on their part, and then they bring it to Pilate. They bring Jesus to Pilate so that Pilate can make this thing happen for them because they don't have the authority to put Jesus to death. And everybody knows that. Okay? So they bring it, and here's the interesting thing, is that they bring Jesus to Pilate, and it's really early in the morning. It's maybe even around 6 o'clock in the morning. which is just how the days would run back then. But it's like the first thing that Pilate has to deal with is this mob, this crowd that's gathering outside in the court, and he has to deal with this first thing. But here's the thing: is Pilate sees all this happening. He sees right through the situation. He knows exactly what's going on, and so here's the first couple of things that he notices about Jesus. One is that Jesus is not a criminal. He realizes that. So he asked them, verse 29, Pilate then went out unto them and said, "What accusation bring ye against this man?" And look at their answer. They answered and said to him, "If he were not a malefactor, or if he were not a criminal, we wouldn't have delivered him up to you." Isn't that like the most like vague, bogus thing? Like, the whole reason we're bringing him to you is because he's a criminal. And it's like, from the start, Pilate knows that they don't have a case. Okay, that whatever they're saying about Jesus is like they're on thin ice. It doesn't hold any water. So they present him no argument. And we won't turn to it, but in Matthew chapter 27, in that account, Matthew notes that Pilate could see the Jews' motive, and he could see that they were envious of Jesus. He says he knew that the Jews had delivered Jesus up for envy. Okay? So he could see that right off the bat. So he knows that Jesus isn't a criminal, that they're just envious of Jesus, and he also knows that Jesus isn't a threat. We won't read all the way through the initial conversation, but Pilate questions Jesus, verse 33 through 38. He questions him several times, but he questions Jesus, and he's trying to discern, okay, am I missing something about the Jews bringing me this man? Pilate called Jesus and said unto him, verse 33, he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it to thee?" And Pilate kind of almost like scoffs at this a little bit. Look at how he answers this in verse 35. He says, "Am I a Jew?" He's saying, this isn't my problem. I'm not concerned with this. I'm not a Jew. I don't have anything to do with you. He says, "Am I a Jew?" He says, "Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you unto me. What have you done?" And Jesus, the answer that he gives him, and everything that he answers. In verse 36, Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from hence." Pilate therefore said unto him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto truth. Everyone that is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said unto him, "What is truth?" And so Pilate essentially decides here, he decides that Jesus is not a threat. He's kind of diving into like this existential conversation, of morals, and I believe what all he discerns about Jesus is that he's just a good teacher. He's not this conquering king. He's not a threat. He's not a threat to Rome. And so he says, I want you to look at several verses very quickly here. Pilate sees that Jesus is not a threat. He's not a military leader. And so multiple times here he says, "I find no fault at all in this man. Verse 38 it says, "And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews and said unto them, I find in him no fault at all." Look down at verse 4 of chapter 19, verse 4. "Pilate therefore went forth again and said unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that ye may know that I find no fault in him." Down in verse 6, the end of the verse, Pilate said unto them, "Take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." So Pilate is very convinced that there's nothing wrong with Jesus. He also realizes that he's kind of out of his element here, and there's something bigger that's going on, and it's even things that he doesn't understand. He understands that this is not even a situation that he wants to have any part of. If you go back to Matthew chapter 27, included in the account there is that Pilate's wife comes to him and says, "Don't have anything to do with this man. She says, I haven't been able to sleep because I've been having essentially nightmares. I've been having dreams about this man, Jesus. Don't have anything to do with him. And so that, Pilate's, that's on his mind. And then, chapter 19, verse 7. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid. He realizes that something's different here, something's off. Let's go back through here then. I want to look at what Pilate tries to do, because over and over again he actually tries to free Jesus. So let's look at, he's assessed the situation. Let's look at what he attempts to do. In Acts chapter 3, as Peter is preaching to the Jews, he states that Pilate was determined to let Jesus go. Pilate was determined. He wanted to release Jesus. That was his goal. And so how does he approach this? We'll kind of walk back through the passage here. The first thing really that Pilate tries to do is he just tries to dismiss the Jews. In verse 31, he says, take ye him and judge him according to your law. He says, this is not a Roman problem. This is a Jewish problem. You guys take care of this. This is not my problem. So it's not a Roman issue. Along with that, he tries to just essentially pass off the responsibility. If you go to Luke chapter 23, in that account, when they mention that Jesus is from Galilee, Pilate goes, oh, Galilee? Herod's in charge of Galilee, so that means that this man Jesus is under his jurisdiction. So he sends Jesus off to Herod, and Herod can't do anything, discern anything, doesn't find any problems with him. There's further evidence, and Herod sends him back to Pilate. So he tries to pass Jesus off to Herod. In Matthew chapter 27, when it's really gotten to this point where Pilate's kind of like, it's where we get this phrase, just wash my hands of the whole situation. That's literally what Pilate does in front of the people, is he washes his hands and says, my hands are clean from this. This is your problem. I'm not at fault. I'm not guilty of this. So there's that whole aspect of washing his hands. And then even, again, if you go back to chapter 19 and down to verse 6, he said he really tries to put the responsibility back on the Jews here. And he says it's your problem. When the chief priests, therefore, in verse 6, when the chief priests, therefore, and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, you take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. He essentially says it's your problem. So he tries to pass off his responsibility, he tries to just dismiss the issue, and then he actually, throughout this, he tries to just make the Jews happy. He tries to appease them, is what he tries to do. The end of chapter 18, we haven't read these verses yet, but it brings up the aspect of releasing a prisoner to the Jews at the Passover. Verse 39, he says, but ye have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? So he tries to give the crowd a way out. He knows the religious leaders are united against Jesus, but he says, well, maybe I can get the majority rule to free Jesus. And now you have the situation, it's a whole other sermon in and of itself, of you have Jesus, God, innocent, pitted against Barabbas, who's a known criminal, a murderer, a thief, a enemy of Rome. And the people want Barabbas. And Pilate tried to use that situation as his way out, and that doesn't work. He tries to give the Jews, really, it's an impossible choice. Chapter 19, let's go to verse 1. And in trying to appease the Jews, he has Jesus severely beaten. And what he tries to do is he tries to give the Jews some sort of punishment and humiliation of Jesus so that they'll be satisfied with that. Maybe their bloodlust will be satisfied. Chapter 19, verse 1 says, then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they put on him a purple robe and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they smote him with their hands. Pilate therefore went forth again and said unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate tried to humiliate Jesus. That's the whole aspect of the royal purple robe, and then even this terrible crown that they put on him. And he has him beaten to a pulp and mocks him publicly so that maybe the crowd will be appeased in that way. And we know that none of it works. And again, let me bring us back to here. Here's the final point. We get to what was Pilate's problem here? Because he's the authority. He's the top dog, right? He's in charge of this whole situation. If Pilate said, I don't care what you all say, I'm in charge, he goes free, then that's the final word. And we realize that God was in control and that Jesus was not a victim, but he chose to go to the cross. And the crucifixion was planned before God even created the world. So this was going to happen. But Pilate's part in it, you say, why didn't he just put his foot down? Why didn't he just take control? Pilate lived in fear of man. He was self-absorbed. Really the final straw here, and here's the last few verses that we'll look at. Here's the final straw, chapter 19, and then look at verse 12. Again, it says, From thenceforth Pilate sought to release Jesus. It says, But the Jews cried out, saying, If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. And then look what happens. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the pavement, but in the Hebrew Gabbatha. And he delivers Jesus over to be crucified. Verse 16, Then delivered he him therefore unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. Now you say, well, why is this the final straw? Why is this, why is this the statement when they say you're not Caesar's friend? Why is that the statement that changes the situation for Pilate? And it's interesting if you look to other historical documents from that time period that actually talk about Pilate and how he ruled in Judea. He was not a good ruler. He was very prideful. The historical records tell us that he was very antagonistic towards the Jewish people. And they'd even gotten to a point where he had antagonized the Jewish people so much that they had rioted against him. And that had gotten back to the ears of his superiors. And so Pilate had actually been in trouble before for how he had ruled in Judea. And so Pilate knows that's happened in the past, not long ago, and the Jewish leaders know that that's happened in the past, not long ago. And they know that they can manipulate Pilate because of his position and because of his fear of his authorities, his fear about his position, his fear of the people even. The Jews know that Pilate can be persuaded if they get him in the right situation. They can leverage his poor judgment. And so that's where that statement about Caesar, you're not Caesar's friend, that was kind of like their secret weapon. I think they're saving this for the last. So let's go real quick and we'll end here. Proverbs chapter 29. I do believe this is part of Pilate's problem. It says, Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25, it says, The fear of man brings a snare. It's a trap. Pilate's issue was that he feared people. In some ways, you can't blame him because he's not a believer, right? So he doesn't live his life trying to please God, which is actually the other part of this verse. It's the kind of the little secret for us. The fear of man, it's a trap. It's subtle. That's the whole point of a trap, right? The whole point of an animal trap is it's hidden so that the animal doesn't see it. The animal gets focused on the bait, and so it doesn't notice the trap. Traps are subtle. The fear of man is subtle. It's a trap, and it will trap you. Notice that it brings a trap. It brings a snare. It doesn't say immediately. It says that it brings a snare. It says the fear of man brings a snare. It brings a trap. In that it may seem harmless initially. Living and we don't often think about living in fear of people. And this is kind of the way we can change it, is talking about pleasing people, or finding our value in what other people think of us, or in our status, in how other people view us. Isn't that what Pilate is doing in that situation? He's worried about his authority being threatened. He's worried about his superiors. He's worried about this even getting back to Caesar. He's worried about his position being threatened by this mob. And Pilate lived in a fear of man. I know we need to be done here, but we started late. So let's just talk here for a minute. When it says that the fear of man is a trap, it's a snare, how does pleasing people, living in fear of man, how does that actually trap us? Or how can that trap us? I'm looking for feedback right now. How does the fear of man bring a trap? How does pleasing people, living to please people, bring a trap? Got the quick guns up here. Okay, Max?
Like peer pressure, like when everybody else is like doing something and you're the only one that's not, and they're wanting you to do it too, that can be like putting you in a trap.
Okay. Abby?
Because man is sinful.
Man, what a great point. If you couldn't hear that, she said, because man is sinful. And when we live and we want to make people happy, we're trying to make sinful people happy. We're trying to please sinful people. We're finding our validation in what sinful people think. Whew, that's good. You want to preach? You can go. Okay. I'm just kidding. You're one. I'm going to get in trouble for that. YouTube's going to pull it down. Yes, David.
Like, it can discourage us, like, to preach a gospel to a unsaved person because they might, like, mock us or, like...
Okay, we can be stifled. We can let that stifle us, right? Is that kind of what you're saying in some regard?
Like, the fear of man could discourage us from doing it.
Okay, discourage us. Okay, good. Yes?
Reputation.
Okay.
When we do stuff good, but you don't want to damage that reputation.
We're worried about what people think, how people view us. That's good. That's good. All good things, but I'll move us along here. That's good. Here's maybe another aspect of that. You ever think about this? That if you try to please people, sinful people, that's a really good point. There's too many people to please. It's like where we get that phrase, we're like, well, you can't please everyone, and it's so true, because you can't. And if I find my validation in what this person thinks, what about what that person thinks? And now I'm trapped because I'm trying to please them, I'm trying to please them, I can't please everybody. All right, we need to be done here. Let's look at the last half of the verse here, because this is the safe part for the believer. It says, the fear of man brings a snare. Verse 25. It says, but whoso puts his trust in the Lord shall be safe. I'll just sum it up quickly, is that our walk with God, our relationship with God, our understanding of God, trust in the Lord is what he says. And he says, shall be safe. Why is there trust in God brings safety? And why is that? It's because when my goal is to please God, a perfect God who has perfect expectations that are not no sinfulness attached to them. It's pure motive then. And it doesn't matter what other people are trying to do or trying to think about me. Pay attention. So hopefully that's a little note of encouragement at the end. We do need to watch out for living in a way of trying to please people, worrying about what people think of us. We worry about what God knows about us, whether he's pleased with us. All right, we got to be done. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time that we've had tonight. We just thank you for time together and fun time together and time that's centered around your word. Lord, thank you for the good conversation in growth groups tonight and just being able to encourage each other with what we've been reading. And Lord, may those conversations, may those motivate us to dig into our time with you and to encourage each other in that. And Lord, may this message about Pilate and the fear of man, may this stick with us well. May we live to please you, not people. May we live to please a perfect God, not sinful people. So God, we thank you for your word in that way. May we keep these things in our hearts and mind. And Lord, we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.